The San Antonio Spurs had a really weird season, mainly due to their unique approach to begin the season, deciding to open the year with their superstar 7'4" rookie, Victor Wembanyama, playing as a forward. Something that by itself isn't all that crazy, but at the same time they inserted last year's 9th overall pick, Jeremy Sochan, a 6'9" power forward, into the starting point guard role. An interesting decision, to say the least. Now it isn't too hard to see the thought process there. By eliminating any resemblance of a primary playmaker role, the Spurs hope to spread around those responsibilities, theoretically enhancing playmaking across the whole entire roster. It sounds good in theory, but the NBA is just usually not that simple. Eventually, it became clear that the experiment was more of a waste of time than anything, possibly detrimental. It wasn't just a lack of playmaking that was bringing the Spurs down, and specifically Wembanyama. It was ball handling. To open the season, the far and away top ball handler in that starting lineup was Keldon Johnson. That's less than ideal. And because of that, we were seeing very little separation created from that starting unit. Very little offense created in the pick and roll. Very little opportunities at the free throw line. And most of the time, an offense that was continuously settling for jump shots super early into the shot clock. Then what really made it so clear that throwing that group into the fire was probably hindering more than helping was just how different things would go when Tre Jones came into the game, their starting point guard from a year ago. Over the first part of the season, he led the team in offensive rating. A huge factor in that wasn't just the skill set that he brought to the lineup, but how much better Wembanyama was able to play while he was on the court. Over the first 30 games, the team had a negative 13.3 net rating, while Wembanyama and Sochan were on the court together. With Wembanyama and Tre Jones together, the team had a positive 3 net rating. Now this doesn't suggest that Sochan was terrible or Tre Jones is incredible. Neither are true in fact, but it blatantly showed just how important certain skill sets are on the court. For a while, there was some hope that that starting unit would start to figure things out, but eventually, that hope was lost, and thankfully, the Spurs decided to make some big changes. Zach Collins and Keldon Johnson were taken out of the starting lineup in favor of Tre Jones and Julian Champagnie. Sochan was back at the 4, and Wembanyama was now the starting center. Now these moves didn't suddenly make the Spurs super competitive. No move would have done that given their current talent pool, but it allowed us to get a much better picture of where the team is right now, where they're going, and the biggest thing, it allowed us to see just how transformative Wembanyama could be even this early into his career. Once moving to the center position, over the next 52 games, he averaged 22 points, 11 rebounds, 4 assists, and 4 blocks, while shooting 48% from the field and 35% from 3. Absolutely absurd. It's clear that as long as he can stay healthy, this team will not be at the bottom of the Western Conference for very long. That's what makes this upcoming offseason for them so fascinating. We saw how much the team desperately needed that ball handling, playmaking, and individual creation. We saw the impact someone like Tre Jones was able to make. But that doesn't even mean that Tre Jones is necessarily a foundational piece of this team going forward. He's a talented playmaker, but he's a really low volume scorer, a very inconsistent outside shooter, and more often than not, a liability defensively. The narrative isn't how impactful Tre Jones is, it's how much this team lacked that skill set, which is why there's so much hope for this team even in the immediate future. Today's video is sponsored by BetterHelp. I've personally dealt with anxiety my entire life, and by far the most effective thing for me when it comes to keeping that under control has been going to therapy. Having an unbiased professional that wants to and knows how to help has truly been the difference for me, and I really wish I started sooner, especially with there being resources like BetterHelp that take away almost every hurdle that comes with starting therapy. All you've got to do is go to their website. You can use my link, betterhelp.com/Jimmer, answer a few questions, and usually within 48 hours, BetterHelp matches you with a professional that has years of experience helping people go through the same struggles you're dealing with. Everything happens right on your phone or computer, and you have several options on how you want to communicate. You can use video chat, phone call, or even just messaging, whatever you're most comfortable with. It shouldn't be hard to get the professional help you need. So let BetterHelp connect you to a therapist who can support you all from the comfort of your home. If you're interested, visit betterhelp.com/Jimmer or choose JimmerRange during sign up, and they're going to give you a special discount on your first month. Thank you BetterHelp for sponsoring today's video. There's a lot of room to go up from Tre Jones this offseason. An offseason that's going to begin with the NBA draft, where they're going to have 2 selections, both inside the top 8, something that wasn't a guarantee. They had their own selection, that wasn't going anywhere, but that 8th overall spot via the Raptors had a top 6 protection on it. It took the Hawks jumping up 9 spots and the Nets going to Houston jumping up 6 spots for the Spurs to get that pick this year. Now at this stage in the pre-draft process, we haven't really heard as many rumors on San Antonio's potential direction as you might think. For quite a while, the most commonly player we've seen mocked to them was 6'6" Serbian point guard Nikola Topic, and it's pretty obvious why. He's being looked at as far and away the top facilitator in this draft. Recently, however, it seems we're starting to see his stock cool a little bit, as teams aren't getting the chance to evaluate him in the same way they are with the other prospects. Topic had an incredible beginning to this season that sent him skyrocketing up the draft board, but since then, we haven't seen much from him. He suffered a knee injury that kept him out from January through April, then just recently after returning, suffered another setback, re-aggravating that same knee injury. To be very clear, this seems to be nothing but a short-term concern. He'll definitely still go very early in this draft, potentially to the Spurs, but it has made his exact landing spot a lot harder to predict. Now again, while there aren't too many rumors when it comes to San Antonio's draft, there have been a couple. ESPN's Jonathan Givony reported that both the Spurs and Grizzlies are high on Providence's Devin Carter going in the top 10. Luckily for San Antonio, they have 2 picks before Memphis is going to make their selection, so the Spurs could take him or make a trade if they believe the hype. Kelly Iko of The Athletic said the Spurs are said to be big fans of UConn's Stephon Castle. League sources said he's moving up their draft board. San Antonio has 2 top 10 selections and could take Castle at either 4 or 8. Then we saw Zach Lowe report that rival executives expect the Spurs to be very interested in Nikola Topic and Zachary Rezege, stating they would be nice fits next to Victor Wembanyama. Now for Rezege, right now it appears that they would almost certainly have to trade up in the draft in order to select him. But aside from him, while there's still very little clarity on their exact draft night targets, the direction I think is blatantly obvious. Help in the backcourt is almost certainly going to be added, potentially even with both of these selections. But I really think some of the names dropped in those reports are actually giving us a lot of insight into their offseason goals past the draft. Once you take a look at some of the odds and rumors swirling around potential trades and free agency moves for the Spurs, it isn't shocking to see names like Castle or Carter, guys that come with a lot more positional flexibility than let's say Topic or Rob Dillingham. Spurs GM Brian Wright told The Athletic they're going to be strategically aggressive this offseason, something that according to some of these Vegas odds for certain trade scenarios might be an understatement. Right now there's some fascinating scenarios going on with a couple of Eastern Conference backcourts. First, you've got the Cleveland Cavaliers, a team that hasn't had the ascension of the Eastern Conference they expected after making the blockbuster trade for Donovan Mitchell, something that's cast a lot of doubt about the team's ability to keep him around long term. Shams reported that Mitchell could be on the move if he and the Cavs can't agree on an extension. Now in the case of a Mitchell trade, there's currently nothing to suggest that San Antonio would be in those conversations. However, the rest of that report from Shams is where things get interesting. If the two sides are able to agree to a deal, then fellow guard Darius Garland could be traded instead. Now that's a scenario where the Spurs would be extremely likely to get involved, and the Vegas odds back that up. Right now there isn't much activity from odds makers in this type of market, so take the odds with a grain of salt, but currently in the event of a trade, Bovada has San Antonio as the heavy favorite to land Garland. They're sitting at plus 300 or 3-1. The next closest would be the Lakers at 6-1, followed by a cluster of teams like the Magic, Pelicans, and Timberwolves at 9.5-1. This is a scenario I think just as fans of the sport, we should probably be hoping for. Garland at only 24 years old fits the timeline of this team, but also just might be a match made in heaven. Essentially, he's a far superior version of Trey Jones. He doesn't have great size, but is an elite ball handler and playmaker. The big difference that separates the two, however, is pretty much every aspect of scoring. Darius Garland's coming off a season in which he averaged 18 points and 7 assists, shooting with 45-37 splits. But that was actually a down season for him. Just 2 years ago, in only his 3rd year, he was an all-star, averaging 22-9 on 46-38 splits. He's one of the few players that I think it would be hard to question almost any level of aggressiveness from San Antonio, but he's far from the only point guard they're expected to be well in the mix for. The other backcourt filled with a lot of speculation recently is the Atlanta Hawks, the team that's currently holding the #1 pick in the draft, something that only adds to the intrigue and questions surrounding their offseason. Will it be used to continue to double down on this current core? Or could it be the start of a potential reset for them, something that rumors suggested was a potential option for them even before they jumped up 9 spots in the lottery? At the very least, what is clear is that big change is coming for them. That's a given. Throughout this past season, it seemed the most likely piece involved in that change would be DeJounte Murray. It felt like it was only a matter of time before the backcourt of him and Trae Young was broken up, and between the two, it appeared Murray would be the most likely departure. However, recently, that narrative, at least according to some, has started to flip. ESPN's Brian Windhorst reported that Atlanta could be more likely to trade Trae Young than DeJounte Murray. The king of NBA rumors, Adrian Wojnarowski, reported at the analyst desk of the NBA draft lottery after the Hawks landed the top pick.
Possibility of trade talks, including Trae Young in this spring and into the summer, are very real too. But that
regardless, at least according to Mark Stein, one of either Young or Murray is likely to be traded this offseason, a situation that almost immediately involves the Spurs for several reasons. It's obvious that they're going after help in the backcourt. Trae Young fits the mold you probably point to as a potential fit. Then DeJounte Murray, he's someone that the Spurs are obviously very familiar with, as he spent his first 6 years of his career there before going to Atlanta. But what really intertwines the two teams and makes the dynamic between both so interesting is the fact that the Spurs currently hold control of a lot of Atlanta's future draft capital. They have their first round selection next year in 2025. They've got the right to swap in 2026, then once again have their selection outright in 2027. Now, this wouldn't really mean all that much if Atlanta intends to keep getting super aggressive with their success in the short term, but especially after landing that number 1 pick, it probably makes the Spurs the far and away favored trade partner in the event that Atlanta decides to go more in the direction of a rebuild, something that's pretty hard to do without your own selections. Now, there are a lot of conflicting reports regarding this whole situation. ESPN's Tim McMahon said, "I will say I've talked to people who know Wembanyama who have indicated he's at least interested by the idea," referring to the addition of Trae Young. But then he would go on to say, "Now, intrigued by the idea and pounding the table are two very different things. I have no idea whether Popovich would be intrigued." Then we saw Yahoo's Jake Fisher report that the Spurs' interest in acquiring Trae from the Hawks has been vastly overstated, and they've shown very little interest in the 3-time All-Star. Pretty interesting reports considering that the Vegas odds makers are implying that the Spurs would indeed be a very likely landing spot for Trae. According to bookies.com, Atlanta is still the slight favorite to beat Trae Young's team next season. They're at plus 250. But right behind them is the Spurs at plus 300, followed by the Lakers at plus 325. For some context, that's an implied 29% chance for the Hawks, 25% for San Antonio, and 24% for LA. It's always hard to navigate all these odds and these rumors, especially when they conflict each other, but I think it's important to look at both, as a middle ground between the two is probably our best idea of what the situation currently is. Now, Trae Young and Darius Garland is far from where this list of potential trade targets for San Antonio ends. Pretty much any point guard that comes on the market, any backcourt player in general, is going to have rumors involving San Antonio. It's also not just trades. We're seeing plenty of reports regarding free agency interests, the big one recently being Golden State's Chris Paul. Mark Stein reported that a potential team to watch should Paul and the Warriors part ways is San Antonio. Among the early personal rumbles in circulation, the Spurs could emerge as a Paul suitor if they decide to pursue some veteran know-how on a short-term contract basis to furnish presumptive Rookie of the Year winner Victor Wembanyama with more seasoned help in year 2. But going back to the draft, we skipped ahead a little bit as I think it's important to look at some of the moves they could potentially pull off later in the offseason to get a better idea of what they're going to do on draft night. Initially, the first instinct was expecting them to load up in the backcourt, but seeing how active their offseason is expected to be following the draft, it's far from a given they're going to attack those needs as directly as you might expect. That's why it wasn't surprising at all to hear names like Castle or Devin Carter, guys that have the size to comfortably slot into both roles in the backcourt. In Castle's case, maybe even beyond that. Selections that don't sacrifice on talent, still address their needs, but also avoid potential logjams created by their future offseason moves. At 4, I would really expect them to go with one of Reed Shepherd, Topic, or Stephon Castle. Then at 8, I would favor one of Devin Carter or Dalton Connect, with Rob Dillingham and Cody Williams being two other very realistic selections. But I think what happens at 8 is going to be heavily dependent on what happens at 4. With the exception of something like a Castle-Devin Carter selection combo, I wouldn't expect back-to-back guards with these picks. I think they're going to be keeping a door open for some of those best-case scenarios. Something like this. They select Castle at 4. 4 picks later, they go with Tennessee's Dalton Connect. Then San Antonio reaches a deal with Cleveland that sends Keldon Johnson, Malachi Branham, and some combination of future first-round draft capital, which they have plenty of, in exchange for Darius Garland. Then with plenty of cap space at their disposal, they get fairly aggressive targeting some more wing help. They go after guys like KCP and Gary Harris, but KCP ends up deciding to return to Denver, so in this case, they land Gary Harris. In a series of moves, all of which aren't hard to imagine in the slightest, they head to next season with a potential rotation of Darius Garland, Devin Vassell, Gary Harris, Jeremy Sohan, and Victor Wembanyama, with several options off the bench. The rookies Castle and Connect, and returners like Trey Jones, Champagnie, and Zach Collins. To be clear, this isn't my exact prediction, rather just what I believe to be a reasonable example of what we could see from them over the next couple months. Sure, there's a chance we see a whole lot of nothingness after the draft. They basically run it back. But between how quickly Wembanyama's dominance will force their hand into competing in the short term, how enticing he potentially makes the Spurs as a destination across the league, San Antonio's current future pick pool, which includes Atlanta's future picks, which they might highly covet, their current cap situation, and the widely expected change coming to some of these backcourts across the league, it's hard to envision an offseason that even remotely resembles one we usually see from a team that just won 22 games.